My name is Vivian Carter. I am 28 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, and I work as a senior financial analyst. On paper, I look like the stable one. I pay my rent on time. I show up early. I keep my voice level even when my inbox screams. The night my family decided I no longer belonged in their house, my phone buzzed with a reminder titled Family Dinner. That was the joke. It was never dinner. It was a meeting where the decision was already made, and I was only invited so I could accept it. My parents' house sits north of the city, quiet and expensive in a way that always feels like a warning. My brother Daniel calls it legacy. I parked under the streetlight and sat there, hands locked on the steering wheel, breathing through the tightness in my throat. The air already felt different. Inside, the lights were bright and unforgiving. Elaine, my mother, had arranged snacks like we were celebrating. Richard, my father, sat at the head of the table in his pressed shirt. Daniel leaned against the counter in a suit, polished and bored. He smiled at me like I was a problem he could not be bothered to solve. We talked about nothing. Then Richard folded his napkin with slow fingers and said, "Vivian, we think it is best if you live on your own for a while." He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The words landed like a lock clicking shut. I laughed once, too sharp. Elaine flinched. Daniel looked away. I asked why, and Richard said I was too emotional lately. He said I brought tension. He said people talk. He never said what I had done, because that would have required naming what they had done first. My palms went damp. I stared at the family photos on the wall, all of us smiling like actors who knew the camera. I could not remember the last time anyone asked how I was sleeping. I could remember every time they asked me to move money, open an account, sign a form, because it was easier if it was in my name. So I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my keys. No one stopped me. Elaine whispered my name, but it sounded like a habit, not a plea. Richard told me to be reasonable. Daniel told me this was for the best. I walked out into the cold Seattle night with a quiet, sick clarity. I was not their daughter. I was their shield. If I stayed, I would keep taking hits meant for them. If I left, the truth would finally come looking for its real owner. And, for the first time, I let myself wonder if that was exactly what I wanted. In my purse, a folded bank letter pressed against my fingers, and I could feel the numbers like a pulse, waiting to be spoken. I did not go home that night. I drove until the city lights blurred and parked near the waterfront, staring at the black water as if it could answer me. I kept replaying Richard's voice in my head, calm and surgical, telling me I was too emotional. It was always the same word they used when they wanted me quiet. Emotional, difficult, unstable. Words designed to make me doubt my own memory. I opened my purse and pulled out the bank letter I had ignored for weeks. It was addressed to me, not to my father, not to my brother. My name, my social security number, my responsibility. I read it again, slower this time, and felt something cold slide into place inside my chest. A line of credit, a guarantee, an account I did not remember opening, yet somehow had. When I was 18, they told me it was just paperwork. Richard said it with a smile, like he was teaching me how the world worked. Daniel nodded along, already halfway out the door to his future. I was proud back then, proud that they trusted me, proud that I could help. No one explained why my name was always the cleanest option, why my credit was the one they wanted untouched and invisible. At 19, I signed my first guarantee. At 21, I opened a second account. At 24, I was asked to move money between entities I did not fully understand. Each time, they said the same thing. It is temporary. It is harmless. It is for the family. Each time, I believed them, because believing was easier than asking questions that made the room go quiet. I thought my job was my shield. Senior financial analyst. Numbers were my language. Risk was my discipline. I told myself that if something was wrong, I would see it. That was the lie that almost destroyed me, because the truth was never hidden in the numbers. It was hidden in who they put in front of them. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Laura Bennett. She spoke softly, the way people do when they expect you to break. I laid everything out, every account, every signature, every moment. I remembered being told to trust them. She listened without interrupting, which somehow hurt more than if she had. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she asked me a single question. Vivian, did you know that if this structure collapses, you are the only one legally exposed? I told her I did not. She did not sound surprised. She explained it slowly, how my name was the buffer, how liability flowed downhill and stopped with me, how Daniel's firm and Richard's position insulated them, while I stood alone at the bottom holding everything up. She did not call it betrayal. She called it design. I left her office feeling like I had stepped out of my own body. On the sidewalk, people hurried past with their coffees and headphones, living lives that made sense. I sat on a bench and pressed my palms together until they stopped shaking. I thought about every dinner where they praised Daniel, every holiday where my job was described as safe, boring, unremarkable. I understood then why they liked it that way. For weeks, I said nothing. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled in meetings. At night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened files I had never looked at closely before. I printed statements. I cross-checked dates. I learned the difference between ignorance and negligence, and where I stood. The pattern was clear once I let myself see it. Whenever risk increased, my name appeared. Whenever scrutiny came close, I was placed between them and the consequences. They did not need me to succeed. They needed me to absorb. What hurt most was not the money or the fear of prison. It was the realization that every time I thought they were protecting me, they were protecting themselves. Every time my mother told me to be patient, she was asking me to endure what she would not. Every time Daniel called me dramatic, he was warning me not to pull the thread. By the time the first threat letter arrived, I was ready. I did not cry. I did not call home. I scanned it, filed it, and added it to the growing archive on my laptop. Silence had been my role for so long that no one noticed when it became strategy. I understood then that being the strong one had never been a compliment. It was a job description. And for the first time in my life, I decided to resign. I did not confront them after that. I learned very quickly that confrontation was what they expected from the version of me they had already dismissed. Anger would have confirmed every word they used against me. Emotional, unstable, reckless. I refused to give them that comfort. Instead, I became smaller in the ways that mattered to them. I stopped arguing at family gatherings. I let Daniel interrupt me without correcting him. I nodded when Richard explained things I already understood better than he did. I let my mother pat my hand and say she worried about me, as if concern could erase complicity. They relaxed. I could feel it. Silence always made them careless. While they believed I was shrinking, I was collecting. Every email where Daniel asked me to move money quickly because timing mattered. Every text where my father reassured me that this structure was safe, that his people had checked everything. Every voicemail where my mother asked me not to stress Richard with questions because his job was demanding enough already. At work, I did what I always did. I analyzed risk. I followed money. I built models that showed where pressure accumulated and where it eventually broke. At night, I applied the same discipline to my own life. I traced transactions back through layers of shell entities. I matched dates to signatures. I learned which documents mattered and which ones existed only to confuse. There was a particular kind of humiliation in realizing how deliberately ignorant they believed me to be. They spoke around me, not to me, assuming I could not connect what they left unsaid. They never considered that the daughter they dismissed as boring might be dangerous precisely because she paid attention. The first real crack appeared in a quarterly transfer that did not balance. It was small, almost elegant in how easily it could be overlooked, but it pointed somewhere it should not have. I followed it slowly, carefully, until it led back to an offshore account that should not have existed at all. An account tied to a trust Daniel had mentioned only once, in passing, as if it were a rumor. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, staring at the screen, and felt my stomach drop. This was not gray area. This was not aggressive planning. This was fraud. And my name was close enough to touch it. I thought about calling Laura immediately. I did not. I needed more than fear. I needed clarity. I needed to understand how far this went and how many people knew. Panic would only make me sloppy. Over the next weeks, I lived two lives. One was visible. I attended family dinners. I answered questions about work. I listened to Daniel complain about his clients, about how exhausting it was to be responsible for other people's mistakes. I watched Richard enjoy the respect his position commanded, speaking about ethics and leadership without irony. The other life happened in the margins. I saved files to encrypted drives. I printed documents at work and took them home folded inside reports. I learned which servers logged access and which did not. I stopped sleeping through the night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to stop mapping consequences. What surprised me was not the scale of what I found, but the calm with which I accepted it. Once you see the pattern, outrage feels inefficient. This was not personal, it was structural. They had built their lives assuming I would always be there to absorb the impact. Removing myself from that equation would change everything. The day Richard announced a major upcoming deal, I understood why the pressure had increased. A public signing, media presence, new investors, visibility. The kind of moment that rewarded risk takers and punished anyone who miscalculated timing. They were moving fast because they believed they were protected. Daniel was more nervous than he let on. I saw it in the way he checked his phone, the way he spoke too quickly about future plans. He joked about stress, about how success always came with enemies. I wondered if he understood that the enemy he feared was not me, but the truth. I told no one what I knew, not my friends, not my coworkers. Secrets are safer when they belong to one person. I only told Laura when the evidence reached a point where silence became liability. She did not react the way I expected. She did not gasp or scold. She leaned back in her chair and said, "This changes things." She explained what options looked like now, what reporting meant, what retaliation could look like. She did not promise me victory. She promised me reality. That was enough. The closer the signing date came, the more the family tightened around me. My mother called more often, checking in, asking if I was eating well. Richard spoke to me with a careful warmth, reminding me how proud he was of our family. Daniel invited me out for drinks, something he had not done in years. They were securing the perimeter. The night before the event, I sat alone and organized everything one last time. Files labeled, dates aligned, emails cross-referenced. I was not shaking. I felt something steadier than courage. I felt finished. For most of my life, I believed endurance was love. That staying quiet proved loyalty. Now I understood endurance was simply what benefited them. Love had never required this much silence. When I closed my laptop, I knew there was no going back. Tomorrow, they would celebrate. Tomorrow, I would stop protecting them. The morning of the signing arrived calm and bright, the kind of day that made everything feel justified. I dressed carefully, not to impress anyone, but to disappear. Neutral colors. No jewelry that could draw comment. I wanted to look like someone who belonged nowhere in particular. The venue was a hotel ballroom downtown, all glass and polished wood. I arrived early and sat in the back row, watching people greet each other with practiced warmth. Richard moved through the room like a man in control of gravity. Daniel followed him, confident, laughing too loudly at jokes that were not funny. My mother hovered near them, smiling in the way that always meant relief. No one expected me to be there. That was the first advantage. I checked my phone once. Laura had sent a single word, "Ready." I did not respond. There was nothing left to say. The presentation began. Slides moved across the screen, filled with optimistic projections and carefully framed numbers. I recognized many of them. I had helped build similar models at work. I also recognized what was missing. Risk never appears in public decks. It waits in the footnotes, in the assumptions no one questions. When Richard took the stage, the room settled. He spoke about growth and responsibility, about leadership in uncertain times. He spoke as if uncertainty were a challenge he had already conquered. I wondered how many people in the room would still be smiling by the end of the day. I waited until the final applause faded, until the moment when contracts were passed around and pens were lifted. Timing mattered. Laura had explained that to me very clearly. Truth has weight, but timing decides where it lands. I stood up and walked forward. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching myself from a distance. Richard saw me then. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Not fear, Calculation. I handed the folder to the attorney standing near the table. I said nothing. The weight of the paper was enough. The attorney opened it, skimmed the first page, then the second. His expression changed. He looked at Richard, then at Daniel. I heard my name spoken softly behind me. Elaine. I did not turn. Phones began to vibrate across the room. The sound spread like static. Someone checked a screen and frowned. Another excused himself and stepped outside. The atmosphere shifted, subtle but undeniable. This was the moment when momentum broke. Richard cleared his throat and asked for a brief pause. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched the room. Daniel whispered something urgently, his smile gone. I felt no satisfaction, only distance. Within minutes, the first confirmation arrived. Accounts temporarily frozen pending review. An automated email, clinical and precise. Then another, then a call that Richard did not answer. The attorney spoke quietly to the room, explaining that due diligence required an immediate suspension. Investors exchanged looks. Someone laughed nervously. The word IRS floated through the air, unspoken but understood. My mother finally reached me. She grabbed my arm, nails digging into fabric. Vivian, what did you do? I looked at her then, really looked. She was not angry. She was terrified. For the first time, she saw the edge she had pushed me toward. I answered calmly. I stopped committing crimes for this family. Richard stepped toward me, his composure cracking. He told me I was making a mistake. He said we could talk about this privately. He said family matters should not be handled like this. The irony almost made me laugh. Daniel said nothing. His face had gone pale, his confidence draining with every notification that arrived. He finally looked at me, truly looked. And I saw something like recognition. He understood, too late, that silence had never meant ignorance. Security arrived, discreet but firm. The event was officially postponed. Guests were escorted out with apologies and bottled water. The room emptied quickly, leaving only those who had something to lose. Richard lowered his voice and told me he would sue. He said he would ruin me. He said I did not know what kind of people I was dealing with. I listened, because listening had always been my strength. Then I told him he was welcome to try. By the time I left the hotel, my phone was full. Missed calls, voicemails, messages that shifted rapidly from anger to pleading. I did not respond. The story was already moving without me. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment and watched the news cycle catch up. Headlines careful at first, then sharper. Allegations, investigations. No conclusions yet, but questions were enough. Questions change everything. Laura called to confirm next steps. She reminded me this would not be quick or clean. That retaliation would come. That I might lose more than I expected. I thanked her. I had already lost what mattered most to them. Later, my mother called again. This time I answered. She cried. She asked how I could do this to us. I told her quietly that there had never been an us. There had been them, and there had been me. When the call ended, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not happy, not relieved, just unburdened. The role I had played was over. I went to bed knowing that tomorrow would be worse. Lawyers, statements, consequences. But tonight, for the first time, the truth was no longer trapped behind my silence. And whatever came next would finally belong to the people who earned it. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. There were no dramatic arrests in front of cameras, no sudden confessions, no apologies that mattered. There were only letters, meetings, and long stretches of waiting where every notification made my chest tighten. Richard was suspended pending investigation. That was the official language. In private, people stopped returning his calls. Daniel was placed on leave by his firm while compliance reviewed his work. He did not contact me again. I do not know if that was pride or fear. Elaine called less and less, as if distance could soften what had already been exposed. I did not feel victorious. Victory implies celebration, and there was nothing to celebrate. I lost my family in the most ordinary way possible. They simply stopped existing in my daily life. No more group messages. No more holidays. No more pretending that silence was love. There were nights when I wondered if I had gone too far. Not because I doubted the truth, but because I finally understood the cost of speaking it. I had been raised to believe that endurance was moral, that sacrifice was proof of worth. Letting go of that belief felt like learning how to walk again. The legal process moved slowly, as it always does. Investigations expanded. Names appeared in places I had never seen them before. I cooperated fully and then stepped back. My role was finished. I was no longer the buffer. I was simply a witness to what happened when protection was withdrawn. At work, nothing changed and everything did. I focused on my tasks, on numbers that obeyed rules and consequences that followed logic. My manager asked if I needed time off. I said no. Stability, I learned, was something I could finally choose for myself. One afternoon, months later, my mother called. Her voice sounded older. She asked if we could meet, just the two of us. I declined. I did not argue. I did not explain. Some conversations come too late to fix what they are meant to address. I moved apartments. Nothing dramatic, just a smaller place closer to the water. I sold furniture that had belonged to the family house. I kept nothing that felt like obligation. The quiet that followed was not loneliness. It was space. Sometimes I am asked if I regret it. The answer is simple. I regret believing that my worth was measured by how much damage I could absorb. I regret staying silent long after I understood the cost. I do not regret stopping. Families like mine survive on the labor of one person who is told they are strong enough to handle it, strong enough to carry risk, strong enough to stay quiet, strong enough to disappear when inconvenient. I was strong. That was never the problem. I was not born to be the family sacrifice. I was born to live a life that did not require my silence to function. And for the first time, that life belongs entirely to me.